It was supposed to be just another dinner at Margaret's house, lavish table settings, rented crystal, masquerading as heirlooms, and a menu she probably rehearsed with her caterer like a Broadway script. I'd learned to survive these evenings by counting the silverware and pretending not to notice her thinly veiled jabs. But that night, she brought something new to the table: humiliation. "We have a little announcement," Margaret began, her voice syrupy with excitement. She raised her glass, glancing at Ethan and me, as if we were part of a staged performance. "As a token of our appreciation for this wonderful family, Thomas and I have decided to treat everyone to a luxury cruise next month. First class, of course." Around the table, murmurs of surprise and approval rippled. Ethan's sister Lily gasped. His father Thomas smiled thinly. I stayed quiet. Margaret's eyes sparkled as she continued. "We've booked the presidential suite on Pacific Crest Voyages, the most exclusive cruise line available. You know they don't let just anyone in." My fork paused midair. "They even said we were lucky to get the suite. It's usually reserved for, well, very special guests." She turned directly to me now, her expression curdling into something gentler but colder. "Sophia, dear, I hope you understand, but this trip is meant for immediate family." Ethan looked up sharply. "Excuse me." She smiled like a cat stretching in the sun. "It's just that we could only secure one suite, and it's already a tight fit. We thought it best if Sophia sits this one out. Maybe find something more suited to her comfort level." Silence. Lily's eyes darted to mine, uncomfortable. Thomas sipped his wine too fast. Ethan started to speak, but I touched his arm. "It's all right," I said softly, locking eyes with Margaret. She leaned back, satisfied. I smiled. Not because I was okay, but because I suddenly realized something. Margaret had no idea. She had no idea who she was talking to. And she certainly had no idea who owned Pacific Crest Voyages. I picked up my water glass and took a sip. Game on. I was born in Seattle, but my real childhood home was the sea. My father, Richard Bennett, built Pacific Crest Voyages from a single ship into one of the world's most respected luxury cruise lines. People see the prestige now, the press coverage, the private ports, the custom suites, but they don't know how many nights he spent sleeping in an office chair, or how many family birthdays were celebrated with a cake delivered to the engine room. He used to say, "If you ever want to lead something, learn how to serve it first." So I did. At 16, while my friends were lifeguarding at community pools, I was scrubbing decks on the Pacific Crest Harmony, not as the owner's daughter, but as Sophia from housekeeping. I cleaned bathrooms, folded towels, carried trays in the buffet line. I spent a summer learning portside logistics in San Diego, and another as a guest services intern in Alaska. No one handed me a title. I earned every badge, every name tag, every tired footstep. Dad insisted on it, and I never resented him for that. If anything, I respected him more, because he never asked me to prove myself for him, he asked me to do it for myself. Even when I was promoted to Director of Guest Experience at 25, most of the staff didn't know who I really was, and I preferred it that way. It's hard to understand true hospitality if you've never stood behind a counter being yelled at by someone over towel colors. Humility doesn't come from birthright, it comes from experience. So when Margaret looked at me across that dinner table in Newport Beach and saw only a girl she didn't think was good enough, I wasn't angry. I was reminded of every time I was mistaken for a junior employee or overlooked by someone who valued diamonds more than decency, and reminded of what my father always said after someone underestimated me. Good. Let them. It makes the reveal so much more fun. I met Ethan on the rocky shore of Vieques, Puerto Rico, during a reef restoration event our company was quietly sponsoring. He was waist-deep in saltwater, coaxing coral fragments into place with the patience of a monk, oblivious to the sweltering heat or the crowd of corporate observers watching from a distance. I was one of them, just another face in a volunteer t-shirt, clipboard in hand, pretending not to be the daughter of the cruise line signing the checks. What caught my attention wasn't his work, it was the way he spoke to the reef team. No ego, no performance. Just quiet encouragement, thoughtful questions, and the kind of focused care you can't fake. Later that afternoon, he offered me half a peanut butter sandwich and asked what brought me to Puerto Rico. Guest services, I'd said, smiling. Just helping out where I can. We had dinner that night on the dock, eating street food from paper wrappers, while lightning danced over the horizon. I didn't mention my last name or my father's company. I wanted him to know me as Sophia, just Sophia. And Ethan, he never once tried to impress me. That's what drew me in. He wasn't chasing status, wasn't angling for advantage. He talked more about water temperatures and parrotfish migration than brand names or trust funds. As our relationship deepened, I realized he wasn't just uninterested in wealth, he was quietly wary of it, especially the way his mother used it like a shield and a sword. He'd grown up in Orange County surrounded by image-conscious neighbors and a mother obsessed with prestige. By the time he left for college, he already knew he didn't want that world. His distance from it wasn't rebellion, it was survival. When he eventually met my father, I watched him shake hands without flinching. He didn't gush or grovel. He asked questions about the choral funding and challenged a few ideas. My father smiled afterward and said, "That one's solid, keep him." We got married a year later on a quiet beach in the Pacific, just the two of us, a few close friends, and no mention of corporate titles. It was perfect. And Margaret hated it. It started with emails, articles about polished looks for professional women, and links to luxury department stores with handwritten notes like, "Thought this might elevate your style." Then came the job postings, executive assistant roles at boutique firms, internships that paid less than what I made in a week. All from Margaret, all carefully worded to sound helpful. "Not everyone finds their path right away," she once said, over brunch slicing her avocado toast like she was performing surgery. "Sometimes a little direction can make all the difference." I smiled. I always smiled. She'd compliment me with conditions that dresses lovely on you. You should wear things like that more often. Or offer thinly veiled suggestions. You know, Ethan always liked women who took care of themselves. You should try the spa at St. Martin's. They do wonders for tired skin. I laughed it off until I couldn't. Each comment was a paper cut. Small, sharp, and easy to ignore at first, until they started to sting in places I didn't know were raw. I never fought back, not because I didn't know how, but because I chose not to fight battles that didn't deserve my energy. Still, it wore on me. Ethan noticed. One night, as we were folding laundry on the couch, he paused and looked at me differently. "You okay?" he asked. I shrugged. "Just tired." He didn't press. He never did. He knew I'd speak when I was ready. That's what I loved about him. He didn't try to fix me. He just made space for me to be whole again. Margaret, on the other hand, didn't notice anything except appearances. She thought I needed polishing. She didn't realize I was built to withstand storms. And she had no idea the kind of woman she was slowly pushing to her limit. Margaret had outdone herself that evening. The dining room glowed with candles she'd likely instructed her housekeeper to scatter organically. The table was set in gold and white name cards etched in faux calligraphy. She lived for these moments when her world looked just polished enough to make others feel dull in comparison. Halfway through the main course, she tapped her glass for attention. "I have a special announcement," she said, her smile stretched a little too wide. "Thomas and I have decided to treat the family to something unforgettable. Next month, we're all going on a luxury cruise." Gasps, claps, raised eyebrows. Margaret loved it. "We've booked the presidential suite on Pacific Crest voyages," she continued, as if she'd just secured a seat on Air Force One. "It's the most exclusive experience they offer. 5-star dining, private excursions. Very hard to get, but we made it happen." My jaw tensed, but I didn't flinch. She didn't know. Of course she didn't. And she added with a dramatic pause, "It will just be immediate family. Space is limited, unfortunately. Sophia, dear, I hope you understand. This is for real family only." Ethan's fork hit the table. "Mom." No, she waved him off, still smiling. "It's nothing personal. We just didn't want Sophia to feel out of place. Cruises can be overwhelming if you're not familiar." The irony was almost too rich. I took a slow sip of my water and set the glass down gently. Margaret, thank you so much for thinking of the family. That's incredibly generous. She beamed clearly, mistaking my calm for gratitude. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. Excuse me, just a moment, I said, rising from the table and stepping into the hallway. I dialed the number I knew by heart. After 2 rings, my father's voice answered. Richard Bennett speaking. Hi, Dad, I said just loud enough for the dining room to hear. About that presidential suite booking next month for the Hamilton family. We're going to need to make some changes. I stepped back into the dining room just as dessert was being served, something French-sounding that Margaret had mispronounced twice already. She looked up from her plate smug and satisfied, completely unaware that the ground beneath her was about to shift. I sat down, placed my phone on the table, and pressed speaker. Richard Bennett speaking, my father's voice rang out clear and calm. Margaret's smile faltered. Hey, Dad, I said casually, reaching for my water. About that presidential suite reservation next month for the Hamiltons. Dead silence. Of course, he replied immediately, catching on. The one on the Pacific Crest, Majesty, right? Is there a problem? Yes, I said, locking eyes with Margaret. It seems there's been a bit of a misunderstanding. The suite they reserved is actually my personal cabin, and I'd like to release it from public booking. We'll need to issue a refund. A fork clattered onto a plate. Margaret's face drained of color. Your personal cabin? Yes, I said, gently folding my hands. I usually keep that suite reserved for family or VIPs. But I wasn't consulted this time, so I think it's best we open it up again. Ethan let out a quiet snort and shook his head. Oh my God. Across the table, his sister Lily's eyes were huge. Thomas cleared his throat but said nothing. Understood, my father said smoothly. I'll have the deposit refunded immediately. Will you be joining us for the quarterly board meeting next Friday? Wouldn't miss it, I replied. Perfect. Love you, kid. Love you too, Dad. I ended the call and looked up. The table was frozen in a kind of stunned silence. I took a bite of my dessert slowly and deliberately. Margaret finally spoke, voice thin and trembling. Board meeting, personal cabin. I set down my fork. Yes, I'm the Vice President of Guest Experience at Pacific Crest, also the primary heir to the company, but I usually just go by Sophia. Ethan was grinning now. She didn't even want to tell you. Said she'd rather earn your respect than buy it. Margaret's mouth opened, then closed again, completely speechless. She stood up abruptly, muttered something about needing air, and left the room. No one followed her. Thomas exhaled. Sophia, I had no idea. I know, I said quietly. That was the whole point. The clink of silverware was the only sound that filled the room after Margaret fled. No one knew what to say, and honestly, that suited me just fine. Thomas cleared his throat and stood, his face flushed with something between embarrassment and regret. Sophia, he said, walking over to my seat. I owe you an apology, a real one. We didn't know. I looked up at him, calm but firm. I understand, but maybe it's time to ask why you never thought to. He nodded slowly, then lowered his voice. Is there any chance we can keep the booking, for the family, if it's not too late? I took a breath. It's not canceled. Yet. Upstairs, we could hear Margaret pacing, her voice rising and falling through closed doors as she made what sounded like a string of desperate phone calls. Probably to the friends she'd bragged to, or maybe to her credit card company once she realized the deposit was vanishing. Lily, still seated across the table, finally exhaled and leaned back in her chair. This is better than reality TV, she whispered, then gave me a conspiratorial smile. You might be my new hero. I gave a small, grateful laugh, but said nothing else. My hands were steady, my pulse quiet. I wasn't angry, not anymore. Revenge wasn't about yelling or burning bridges. It was about being still enough to let the truth speak for itself, and letting the consequences land exactly where they were earned. As I looked around the table at this family who had once viewed me as a decorative accessory, I realized something even more satisfying than vengeance. I had never needed to raise my voice, because the truth delivered clearly had always been loud enough. Later that night, after we got home, I sat in the dark kitchen nursing a cup of tea that had long gone cold. The house was quiet except for the distant hum of the dishwasher and the soft ticking of the wall clock. Ethan came in barefoot and calm and leaned against the counter. "You okay?" he asked, voice low. I nodded, though I wasn't sure. She humiliated me. She tried to exclude me from something I literally helped design. I had every right to shut the whole thing down. "You did," he said gently. "And you didn't. You let the truth speak instead." I stared into my mug. I could still cancel it, pull the suite, refund everything, walk away. Ethan crossed the room and sat beside me. "You've already won, Sophia," he said quietly. "What you do next is who you are, not who she is." That sat with me. I thought about my father, about how he built an empire by treating dishwashers and CEOs with the same level of respect. About how he used to say, "Grace isn't weakness, it's power wrapped in restraint." I could have crushed Margaret, publicly, permanently, but would that change anything? Or was the real power in doing the unexpected? "I won't cancel it," I said finally. "But things won't go back to how they were, not even close." Ethan smiled. "Good." She would still come on the cruise if she wanted, but the invitation now came from me, and it came with conditions, respect, kindness, and boundaries that were no longer suggestions. Not because I needed to prove anything, but because I finally remembered I didn't have to shrink to make someone else feel tall. The Pacific Crest majesty gleamed in the Miami sun as we boarded. The ocean was still almost reverent, as if it too understood the shift in tides. I'd personally arranged the itinerary, upgrading our suite to the family presidential package, adjoining cabins, private balconies, and a butler who'd worked with our company for over a decade. It was the best of everything. And this time, everyone was invited. Margaret was noticeably quieter than usual as we stepped onto the ship. No name-dropping, no theatrical awe, just small nods and a polite thank you when crew members welcomed her aboard. She seemed more aware now, like she finally understood that luxury wasn't something you wear. It's something you notice in how people are treated. At our first dinner in the captain's lounge, she waited until the entrees were cleared before speaking. "Sophia," she said softly, eyes not quite meeting mine, "I owe you an apology for more than just the dinner. I misjudged you. I misjudged what matters." I looked at her for a moment, then nodded. "Thank you." She turned to one of the servers and smiled warmly. "The crew has been incredible. It's clear this company runs on heart, not just polish." Ethan squeezed my hand under the table. Across from us, his sister Emma leaned in. "Sophia, do you think I could apply for one of your marine internships? I've always loved the ocean, and after seeing the coral lab this afternoon..." "Absolutely," I said, surprised and touched. "You'd be a great fit." Later, as we stood by the railing, watching the lights of Miami fade into the horizon, my father approached. "Well," he said, hands in his pockets, "they don't look nearly as scary as I expected." I laughed. "Give it time." Then Margaret joined me alone, a glass of champagne in her hand. She looked out over the water and said, "I always thought power meant being at the top of the guest list. I never realized real power was in how the crew looks at you, with respect." I didn't say anything. I just let her stand beside me in the quiet. For the first time, we weren't pretending. We were just two women trying finally to get it right. 6 months later, Margaret stood beside me on the dock in San Diego, clipboard in hand, and sneakers on her feet, volunteering for the company's coastal cleanup program, with a determination that would have stunned the woman she used to be. She wore our Pacific Crest charity vest, like it was couture, handing out reusable water bottles and chatting with crew members by name. She still had her Margaret moments, occasional remarks about presentation or offering unsolicited decor advice in the break room. But now they came with a self-correcting laugh and a quick old habits. "I'm working on it." The change didn't happen overnight, but it was real. She asked questions now. She listened. She even started joining planning calls for our community outreach programs, not to supervise, but to support. Sometimes awkwardly, sometimes too enthusiastically, but always earnestly. Last week, she called me in a flurry. "Sophia," she said, "you'll never believe it. My friend Deborah, you know, the one who brags about her husband's Rolex collection, just booked a cruise with Northern Star Voyages. I raised an eyebrow. And then we can't let her miss the real thing. Their service is terrible. And their environmental policy? Don't get me started, she paused dramatically. Can we make room for her on ours? I smiled into the phone. Of course we can. And we did. The presidential suite Margaret once tried to reserve without knowing who it belonged to, without knowing who I was, now had a new name, the family suite. Not because we needed the symbolism, but because it reminded us that family wasn't just blood or obligation or people who sat at your table by default. It was who you made space for, especially when they'd once tried to exclude you. On board one evening, I stood at the edge of the deck, watching the sunset stretch across the water. Ethan joined me, wrapping an arm around my waist. You ever think about how different it could have been? All the time, I said. But I'm glad we waited. They needed to see who I really was. And I needed to remember I didn't have to prove it. True power isn't in exclusion. It's in creating space for others, for growth, for change, even for those who once shut you out. And that's how we move forward. Together.